Hey everyone. I wanted to post this story up in hopes of explaining the horror that you can actually find on the dark web. Honestly, most of the things you find on the dark web aren't actually the horror movie cliche-laden websites that everyone seems to think they are. Most of the dark web is questionable or illegal adult content, people trying to buy medications illegally, and etc. If you're wanting something like what you see in the movies, you have to actually know where to look, as in, have the onion link. I'm not saying that those things don't exist, they just aren't easily or readily available. A lot of people tend to think that it's like a dark version of Google, where you can search for crazy stuff and be given results in a few moments. It's really not. Anyways, now that that's out of the way, I wanted to talk about a dark web experience that was honestly horrifying for my friends and I. This was several years ago, and I think we were 17 at that time. And we thought that we were hackers. I know, it sounds stupid, but the three of us were all about the nerdy crap Python, networking, and again, quote-unquote, hacking. I'll spare myself the embarrassment in explaining all of that, but just know that we knew our way around a computer. And naturally, the three of us gravitated towards places like Reddit and the 4chan and such. And I don't remember where we heard about the dark web, probably from a friend, the news, or on one of the aforementioned websites. But when we learned about the difference between surface web and dark web, our curiosity was piqued. We started looking into what it was, what was out there, and what we could do. And of course, we were enchanted with the hacker haven it was glorified to be. We thought we would get on there, look at some of the questionable sites, and be the coolest kids because we accessed content that others didn't know existed. So, we did what we had to do. Loaded up Tor, got information for some onion links, and got ready to have our minds blown. Of course, it ended up not being as interesting as we thought it was going to be. The sites were plain and bland. We saw a couple sites selling pills, others that we didn't even bother scrolling through because of the front pages, and a few webcam sites that we honestly weren't interested in. I think all of us were getting a bit disappointed in what we were finding, though I don't know what we were expecting to find really. I think we started just clicking through and going anywhere and everywhere we could get to. And looking back, this was a really stupid idea. After clicking around for a while, we ended up on a page that looked a little flashier than the others. I can't remember the name of the page, but I think it was something along the lines of "your choice" or something like that. And as we started on the home screen, the whole page looked like it was a site for a butcher shop. There were a number of pictures of meat slices and cuts all over the front page, explaining the quality and what seasoning went best with each piece. Unfortunately, I think you can all see where this is going. We ended up on a page where a list of cuts, and each of them had a diagram of a person, and the part where the meat came from was highlighted. Some of what was on the page was horribly graphic, so I won't explain it in this story. But you can imagine what all was there. One of the most disturbing parts of this website was its explanation on its sourcing. I recall it explaining that all packaging would be discreet and that they would include their own seasoning packet that would go best with what you choose. What's worse is that they explained that all of their meat was fresh and sourced on demand, They touted the fact that they had the ability to get everything when it was ordered. Obviously, we were freaked out by seeing this kind of meat. So we got off the site and pretty much immediately removed Tor. We all kept up our pursuits in the ID world, but I don't think any of us have ever been back to the dark web since. I found my enemy on the dark web. My friends have recently gotten into browsing the dark web. It was fun to log on and see what was on there, and we didn't really stumble on anything that was too weird. Well, not at the start anyway. We wanted to track down some friends we lost in touch with, and the usual places didn't work. Facebook, Instagram, and etc. Nothing. So we looked up their family members in order to try to find some clues. We felt like we were spies or something. It was amazing. We eventually found a site that was blank, except for a search bar text square. Above it said to enter any piece of information you had about the person, and it would dig it up. We didn't want to potentially endanger a friend or something, so we put in the old high school bully's name. It was typed in and then we pressed enter. It was searching, and it was pretty slow too. While we waited, we laughed and gossiped about how we imagined her looking now, and after a couple of minutes, the results came up and we were shocked at what we managed to find. We found some old phone numbers for her, some pictures of her throughout the years, and we all took pleasure in knowing that they had not been kind. We laughed and kept scrolling. It turned out that she had a rough couple of years, put on a lot of weight, and we were being toxic assholes. We kept scrolling until we saw something that we hated. There was a newspaper report that said that she had been murdered. And it changed the mood of the room, and instantly, we regretted how shitty we had been moments before. We kept scrolling and found pictures of her autopsy. It was gruesome seeing the process, and we finally stared at the screen. What the fuck did we stumble on? We kept scrolling and came to a video of her being strangled to death. She was kicking and screaming, trying to pull the electrical cords from around her neck while the masked man strangled her. She choked, and her face went from blue, and finally, she went still. 10:47. Did we just watch a snuff video? We hoped this was all fake. It didn't look fake, and we were all silent as we stared at the screen. It ruined the jokes, and we felt wrong being able to see that. We clicked away, all too ashamed to look at each other. We decided to search for her on the surface web, or Google, that sort of thing. And there were still the reports that she had been murdered and where her body had been found. And the murderer still hasn't been caught. I want to preface this story by saying that if you have any curiosity about the deep end or dark web, just get rid of it right now. If you're an everyday user and you aren't in the know of how onion routing, encryption, VPNs, and etc. work, then use stories like this one to satiate your curiosity. Don't start down the rabbit hole and don't dig any deeper than you need. That said, let's get into some backstory. I'm a tech nerd 100%. I'm the type of person that was ripping apart old PCs in the 80s and putting them back together, just to see what worked with what. Mind you, that was back when I was a kid. I learned about all the tech back then, and I took that passion into my adulthood. So I work in IT, if that wasn't obvious, and I know about a lot of what goes on out there on the net. Now, that's all well and good, but that's all surface web and surface tech level stuff. The question from here becomes, how does being a geek equal dark web horror story? Simple. I've been there. In fact, I've been there probably more than many of the stories that you've heard on this channel, and many others out there. I've seen quite a bit, and maybe I'll give you a few more stories in the future, but this one is one that I think is worth telling, mostly because it was honestly terrifying. Back when I was on the dark web frequently, there was one site that I used to venture towards frequently. Obviously, I'm not naming that site because as far as I know, it's still out there. This site was kind of a little dark web bazaar. You could buy pretty much anything and everything you could really want, and it wasn't terribly expensive. I used to buy things that were less than legal, and I even used to sell some stuff that was also less than legal. Honestly, this site had everything. Substances, weapons, stolen goods. If you wanted it, you can find it there. The dealers had their ratings that would pretty much tell you how reputable they were, and the higher the rating, the better the overall service or quality of what you've ordered. Think eBay rating but for drugs and other illegal stuff. One day, and one conversation sticks in my mind as probably the most memorable thing that ever happened while I was on the dark web and this particular sale site. I was browsing the content for the hell of it, seeing what was out there that I may have wanted to blow money on, and I saw an entry that was a bit strange. Girlfriend for sale. Honestly, I thought it was a joke. Maybe someone was selling their old silicone doll and wanted to have an eye-catching title. I went to the page and scrolled down to the description, and it didn't help any more than the title. It simply said, "Selling my girlfriend. Message for details." At this point, I felt like I had to message the person, so I did. And here's how the conversation went. I said, "I wanted to ask about your girlfriend for sale." He answered, "All right, what do you want to know?" I said, "Pretty much everything." He answered, "All right, she's 27, a bit on the thicker side. She has black hair, green eyes, and freckles." There was more information that he included here. He used other words to describe her body type, gave exact measurements, and went into a bit of personal details on her. I'm not going to put them here as I want to keep this story out of graphic territory. After he told me all of this, I obviously knew that it wasn't a sex doll. He was legitimately trying to sell a real person. And I wasn't sure what to do or say at this point, so I just said, "Go on." He continued, "Would you like to see her? It may make it easier to see if you're really interested." And I said okay. He then sent me a few pictures of this woman, tied up and gagged in his basement, and she looked exactly like he had explained. Her wrists were bound with duct tape, and she had a chain around her neck that looked to be connected to a concrete pillar in the basement. The look on her face was one of legitimate terror. You could tell that she had been crying excessively and that her hair was a mess. He sent me photos of her in what I'll describe as compromising situations and positions. And I won't get into the details, but honestly, it made me want to vomit. When I clicked on this entry on site, I was expecting it to be a joke, but these pictures and what he told me had me pretty certain that this was real, and that scared the hell out of me. Then he sent me another message. I have one other interested buyer that's offering $70,000 cash by next week. If you can get me at least 75, she's yours. I was so shocked that the only thing I could think to do was ask what her name was, to which he replied, "Sorry, I can't give out her name in case you would do something stupid like try to find her or contact the police." And I replied with, "Oh no, I wouldn't dare. I was just curious." His response to that chilled me to the bone. Good, because it wouldn't matter. There's no one that will miss her, and on paper, she's been dead for a month. I do what I can to make my transactions stress-free, and that includes my prospective buyers. I expect them to help me keep things stress-free, so please don't do anything stupid. He compounded this last sentence with a smiley face emoticon, which really added to the threat, to be honest. And I honestly had no idea what to say. I didn't know if this was legitimate or if it was a honeypot seller trying to arrest human traffickers. I just told him that I would try to get the money together, and if he didn't hear from me by that time, that the other seller came through, and that was fine. I didn't want to raise any alarms with this guy, regardless of who he really was. I really don't have much more to this story, other than to say that I have no idea what happened to her or the seller, and I didn't follow up, and I just kind of let the situation go. I know, this makes me an awful person and I've lost sleep over it, but I'm more hopeful that it was just a honeypot and that he was trying to lure me into being arrested more than actually trying to sell his girlfriend. My body was being sold on the dark web. I had just barely fallen asleep when I heard a crash coming from the floor below me. My eyes were heavy, and I stayed in bed waiting to see if any more noise was going to occur. After a few moments of silence, I convinced myself that the noise came from a dream and it happened to wake me up, like when you get a falling sensation as you drift off. Soon enough, I had fallen back asleep, but as my dreams drifted in and out of consciousness, I could feel a nagging pain that wrapped my hand. It was a hot intensity that persevered through every dream, and my body wanting to wake up, but unable to. As the dreams became distant fragments and my eyes opened as instructed by the morning sun, the pain that I felt in my dreams became all too real. My right hand rested on the blanket that covered me, a blanket that had become slick and saturated with a warm, sticky red, pulling the covers off in a hurry. I was horrified to see what had been causing the pain that I was feeling. My left hand was wrapped in bandages that, much like my blanket, had become soaked in blood. On the left hand, my pinky and ring finger were just missing, and my mouth trembled as the guttural moans pressed out. I was starting to feel lightheaded from the blood loss, but I managed to call the emergency line, and soon enough, paramedics were carrying me out of my house and into an ambulance. Laying in the hospital bed, I explained what happened to the authorities, and they left to check my house for evidence of a break-in. And a few hours went by, and the sun started dipping past the horizon. There was only so long I could watch cable on the TV before my mind started wandering to what happened. I started wondering why someone would break in, why they would just take such a small part of me. As I started trying to piece it together, one of the doctors stepped into the room. One that I hadn't seen before. I eyed him with suspicion as he walked over to my IV bag and informed me that it was time to operate. Though no one I talked to before indicated that I would need surgery. My fingers were cut off so surgically that all they needed to do when I arrived was clean the wound and stitch it up. And before I could start to protest, the doctor put a new liquid into the IV bag, and in my panic, I reached to tear it out of my arm. But not used to only having 3 fingers, I fumbled for a moment, which gave the doctor enough time to restrain me. And all I could see was his stern expression as the liquid entered my body, and I started to feel lightheaded and eventually fell asleep. Once again, I was ushered into the waking world with a searing pain, one that had me arching my back and clutching my side. People were in the room, all muttering amongst themselves. My fingers ran over my skin until I could feel the familiar threading that had closed the wound on my hand. Stitches ran up my side and I could feel tears rolling out of my eyes. The doctor that I had seen when I first arrived, my actual doctor, started walking me through what had happened. Someone had snuck into the hospital. They even had the official clearance that got him into my room, though no one knows who it was, and the cameras seemed to malfunction whenever he would have been in view. Somehow, he waltzed through the hospital, drugged me, and then performed a surgery to remove my spleen. This was the same time that the cops informed me that nothing of value was missing from my home. It really was like someone broke in just to take my fingers. My thoughts were racing and I was struggling to put together a reason why. I could hear the cops muttering. I don't know if they knew that I could hear them or not. Apparently, I wasn't the only one this happened to. Not my exact circumstances, but cases like it were popping up all over. People would just be going through their day. They would get injected with something to make them pass out and keep them out. And when they woke up, they would have bits and pieces missing from them. I tried to keep my cool, tried not to let on how vulnerable I felt, but a shaking body betrayed my attempts. The cops and doctors agreed it was bizarre how in every case, the removal was so surgical, so much so that there was nothing else for the doctors to do to me. The procedure to remove my spleen went off without a hitch. With that, they said that they couldn't keep me much longer, as my insurance would be unwilling to pay. Despite what I had gone through, I was released by the end of the night. At the very least, I was promised that the police cars would patrol the block to make sure that no one was snooping around. I could see their headlights waft through the window throughout the night as I searched around the internet, going from one forum to the next, picking up whatever scraps I could. If it was happening to other people, I figured that there would be some info about it online. A lot of conversations led to the same place. Body parts being taken in shutty motel rooms and being sold has been going on for a long time. People just composited that within the dark web. The process is streamlined. I downloaded a client that allowed me to access such side of the internet and look through the listed sites. It took a while to get used to missing two of the fingers I typed with. Expected keys pressed down only to see no letters appearing. A phantom reminder. I tried searching for my name, but all that came up was my lingering social media. I went to some of the more nefarious sites I saw listed here and there. It was hard to tell what existed as some kind of weird joke and what was legitimate. Then I had the idea to download my Facebook profile picture and reverse image search it. It took a few pages of digging, but eventually I found it. A website had a low-quality image of that picture, and under it was information about me, along with a short image gallery. The fingers on my right hand covered my mouth as I attempted to keep down the swill bubbling in my stomach. I had to look away from the screen. The images of me laying in my bed, fingers freshly cut off, and the pictures of me unconscious in the hospital, blood still pouring from my side. They were too much. I barely made it to the trash can where I spilled my insides. Wet clumps of gritty hospital food smacked against the crumpled balls of paper. Cop headlights once again drove by, and I realized I needed evidence. As the headlights filled my room, I shuffled back to the computer, illuminated by the headlights. I read the page over again, throat still stinging from its recent evacuation. Under the photos was a list of body parts with monetary values assigned to them. Some of them already claimed. Fingers were worth $100 each, and my spleen was listed as $500. A small message rested at the bottom that read, "Don't be greedy, keep them alive." The words almost made my head spin. "Them" was a clickable link, and when I did, I saw who it was referring to. Pages and pages of pictures sat on a grid, names listed under them, as well as how much value they still had left. The way it all came across, it was like a game to see who could collect the most pieces. Or, I don't know. It was sick. Clicking some of the other people revealed what was taken and how far these people were willing to go. Entire limbs had been removed, eyes, clumps of hair. Some people even had kidney stones listed. It seemed like as long as it wasn't fatal, it was fair game. Quickly, I saved the location of the site, writing it down in my phone's notepad so I could take it to the authorities. My body wanted to retch again, but as I moved back from the computer, I realized my room was still lit up. The headlights were still beaming through my window. Making my way over, I looked out at the stationary police car in my driveway. The driver's side door wide open. Just beyond the tint of the window, I could see the faint outline of a slumped over body. My heart started racing, and just as I backed away from the window, a rag was placed over my face. With what I had been through, I managed to stop breathing in. I could tell the rag was wet, soaked in something to knock me out, no doubt. I decided to play pretend and let my body go limp. When the person placed me on the ground and removed the rag, I slowly let air drift into my lungs. Hopefully, they wouldn't see. A minute or two went by before I could feel a mass of chilled metal by my lips. Then, a soft pressing of lips against my cheek. I wanted to throw up, dump more sewage into the garbage can. The metal parted my lips and slipped inside. It was quickly apparent what this individual was there for. As the pliers closed around my teeth and started to tug, the pain quickly became too much and I had to make my move. I brought my knee as quickly as I could, landing it into their stomach. A low groan rang out of the man on top of me, and I reached to grab his wrist. He tried to keep pulling back, my tooth starting to give way. The pain caused my eyes to roll and my vision to get blurry. But I fought as hard as I could, but when I saw how hard he was pulling, I decided that if he wanted it, he could have it. Wasn't even worth as much as a finger was. I let my grip go, pulling my head back, letting the tooth rip free from my mouth as cleanly as it could. The searing agony was unkind, though. It did not reward my bravery. It felt like I was chewing on hot coals. The man was unable to adjust, though, and his body was thrown backwards. Using the heat running through my body, I howled, and I jumped on top of the man, spitting a glob of blood onto his face. The crimson smack and spread out, causing him to shut one of his eyes. The pliers that took my tooth quickly hit the side of my head, body falling over, and I landed hard next to my desk, and the man got to his knees, towering over me. He laughed, wiping my blood from his face, telling me, "I'm going to make a lot of money off of you." I thought of all the monetary values I had. He could take the rest of my fingers, my teeth, or just rip my leg off, as long as I was still alive. Reaching over, he grabbed the rag again and leaned in, seeing that I was defenseless. My body quaked, thinking about what I would wake up without. I wanted to throw up again. I could still smell my vomit in the trash can, and as the man got closer to me, my hand almost instinctively reached to the side and grabbed the trash can. Turning it over, I swiftly put it over the man's head. There was a distinct scream of disgust that rang out in the black plastic bell as my dinner dripped over his face. 6 shades of green and yellow carried by soaked pieces of paper. The world's grossest papier-mâché project. And before he could react, I pushed my fist forward, knocking it against the trash can and sending him falling backwards again. He reached out and tried to grab my left arm. His hand slipped, tried to gain purchase, and when he got to my fingers, there wasn't enough of them to grasp. Blood still frothing from my mouth, I heard my front door being kicked in. Bass-filled voices boomed into the room, and I would later discover that after the other officer failed to report, they sent backup. The man was just supposed to be in and out, knock me out, take a few teeth. He would have been gone before anyone else showed up. Instead, as they stormed the room, looks of concern washing over as they spotted me, he was still there. They restrained him, and as quick as he got in, he was escorted out of the house, kicking and screaming. Maybe it was the blood loss, maybe it was the shock, but the police officer that stayed behind told me that I couldn't stop smiling. Trails of blood pouring from my mouth, a dark gap from where the tooth was removed. And I just smiled at him. A smile that I'm still proud to wear. All the evidence was handed over, and I even got to keep my tooth. I was back at the hospital to treat any injuries I obtained, but I was quickly released back home, where I had mail. Walking inside, I opened the unmarked letter. A simple phrase, whether it was a warning or admiration, I don't know. Either way, the message told me they were watching me. A simple phrase. Don't be greedy. keep them alive. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate each and every one of you. But I would also like to thank my amazing patrons, my top tippers, and my dearest channel members. Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it with all of my heart. If you want to support the channel further, you could also choose to become a patron, a tipper, or a channel member. But remember, it's appreciated, but never a requirement. I would also like to announce that we have merch now. The link is in the description of the video, along with all my other social media links, like my Discord server, Twitter, Instagram, and others. You can connect with me and send your stories there. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't yet, and comments are highly appreciated. And remember, your fear feeds me.